use the question box if you have any questions or comments for the presenter. Documents for today's meeting can be downloaded, and handouts can be made or will be made available for the webinar on the GoToMeeting site. This webinar will be recorded and be available on the Illinois WorkNet website, usually in the next 48 hours. You will also receive a survey asking you about today's webinar. Please share with us your experience and any suggestions that you have that might help improve these webinars. And with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Heather Penzick.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. Nice to virtually meet everyone on the line here. So I'm going to take some time today. Again, my name is Heather Penzick here from Education Systems Center. And if you're not familiar with our center, I like to kind of say we're the liaisons at times between state agency partners and community partners. So we're very much connected and plugged into what's happening on a statewide level, but also at the same time what's happening on a community-based level. So how is policy being implemented in communities throughout Illinois, but also what are the needs within communities that need to be translated back to the state at times as needed. So we work on a lot of different projects here, again, statewide, community-based, and then some strategic projects as well as they align to both that state and community focus. So there's just some context there. We're very much, like I said, plugged in on both sides. And so this is where this project has come out of. I'm going to focus mostly today on the career development experience, and I'll lead you through that a bit here. So to get started with the goals for the day, apologies, my slides weren't turning. I'm going to give you some background on what that is. Some of you all may be familiar with that. It's a term that's outlined in the Illinois Career Pathways Dictionary, but I'm going to give a little bit of background on that for those who may not know, or as a refresher for those who are familiar. I'm also going to spend some time today talking about community examples and definitely diving into two examples, both in healthcare and manufacturing, which I know can be some more difficult spaces to get these types of opportunities in, and just give you some different ideas of how employer and industry is engaging with youth organizations and schools throughout the state here. I'm also going to talk about a resource that's recently been developed late in 2019 before the start of the new year, was the Career Development Experience, or I'm going to refer to it sometimes as CDE. Career Development Experience is a bit of a mouthful, so CDE is an acronym. As soon as I came into this role about a year ago here with Ed Systems, I was like, we're going to make this acronym a thing. And talk about that toolkit and the different resources and some examples of those that are in here, and also take you on a walk through the website, which is part of that. So the toolkit lives as a PDF, but also as a website that is consistently updated. And then what I would really love to do is thinking about this toolkit and thinking about the resources that are out there, is really want to kind of put an opportunity out to you all if you're interested in engaging with this toolkit, using some of the resources, adapting some of the resources, even having me talk to other people. So would definitely love to talk to that as well. This toolkit has been used widely, and it took a lot of work from myself, state agency partners, communities to really get this going, and want to keep it in use and relevant to the community at large here in Illinois. So some background here, what is a career development experience? This definition is straight from the Illinois Career Pathways Dictionary. And so this is a supervised work experience relating to an individual's career area of interest that meets these 6 components. So it occurs in a workplace or under authentic working conditions. Again, this should be engaging an individual and what it would be like to work in that industry or that department or that role. Should be co-developed by an education provider and at least one employer in the relevant field. And a lot of what number 2 is saying is really just who is the person potentially bringing individuals to this employer, the educator or the training program, whatever that might be, and are they having a conversation in partnership with that employer to develop this and make sure that they're not just sending over, an individual who is now not really going to be developed and really engaging in anything authentic, but is just kind of hanging out, maybe free labor for the employer, right? But there really is this co-partnership, this conversation happening. Number 3 is a big one, right? This is a more intensive work-based learning experience, and so there should be sort of compensation or educational credit that is provided to that participant, that individual who is completing the CDE. This also should reinforce some foundational professional skills. And this resource is going to be linked at the end of this slide as well, but most of y'all or some of y'all may be familiar with the essential employability competencies that have been defined by the state, as well as technical competencies for the different pathway areas. So those resources are here, and I have some screenshots of those as well that I'll talk you through. There also should be some sort of professional skills assessment that assesses skill development and is utilized as a participant feedback tool. Again, this is a work-based learning experience. This is a professional development experience for an individual. So at some point, there should be an assessment that is talking to that individual about how they're doing on learning or demonstrating or mastering some of the competencies that have been set forth in here. And again, participant feedback tool, this should be a conversation, just like we all have, yearly evaluations where with our employer, or if we are the employer, right, we're having conversations with our employees. That's a really important thing in the workplace, and it should be something that individuals start to get accustomed to is that feedback conversation. And then also, this should take place for a minimum of 60 total hours. And I'll explain a little bit more of that here. So a lot of people ask me, but really though, what is it? Do I have to rename the things that I might classify as a career development experience? And you definitely do not have to rename anything, right? So a career development experience is a part of Illinois' broader work-based learning continuum. I have it highlighted here in that red box along the continuum. So if you're an individual who is now going to engage in a career development experience, you should have already had some sort of work-based learning experiences before then, whether you'd had some career awareness, right? Maybe you got a presentation about different occupations in an industry you're interested in. You did some career exploration, so that might have been a job shadow or a more intentional guest speaker who came in and spoke to that industry, or you participated in team-based challenge. Again, these terms are all defined in the Illinois Career Pathways Dictionary. The team-based challenge would really reflect some sort of project-based learning where an individual would have worked in a team, in a project related to their industry that had a problem that they had to address that was relevant to the time of now, right? And for them to provide their innovative thoughts and solutions on that problem, work collaboratively with a industry employer, and then present that project. So individuals have engaged in multiple different experiences before they reach this career development experience moment. And again, what is it? It can be all these different terms, right? As long as it meets, I'm just going to go back for a second, these 6 components of the definition, you can call it a career development experience. So most of the terms that we see out there are internship, I think is one of the most common ones that we see, school-based enterprise, a supervised agricultural experience, cooperative education, remote work for a client or employer, a student-led enterprise, or a youth apprenticeship. Again, if it's a registered apprenticeship, this would be kind of in its own different ballgame, but a youth apprenticeship who would meet these components, kind of maybe leading to a registered apprenticeship, would count here. So again, there are a lot of different terms that all mean career development experience as long as they meet these 6 components. And again, like Scott mentioned, if there's questions or anything like that, please feel free to put those in the chat box. And Scott, please feel free to interrupt me at any time as I'm going through this.
I will do that. Thank you.
So I just wanted to put up here, thinking about quality, right? So there's a definition from the Career Pathways Dictionary, but also, so to kind of take a step back here of why I'm involved in this project. So I began my career as a high school science teacher, and I taught out in District 211 in the northwest suburbs here of Chicago. And then moving on from there, I actually taught at an alternative school here in Chicago. So students who had been removed from their home neighborhood public school for whatever reason, whether, they decided to leave their school or they were kicked out of their school, whatever it might be. And then most recently, before I joined the team here at Ed Systems, I was managing a high school internship program where we was through a nonprofit, and we were working with high school students from Chicago Public Schools and offering them 10-month internships. So I have seen a lot of the different spaces and been in the weeds on a lot of this stuff. So this is kind of where my my background and my knowledge of that has been brought into this project here to develop these items for quality for the state when thinking about a career development experience. But beyond my own experience, everything that I'm going to talk about here has come from communities, right, and come from state partners who have interacted with communities. And so really thinking about what is actually happening and how are we really defining throughout the state what quality is for a student or an individual to, sorry, I say students a lot, it's my like high school self coming out, for an individual to really complete a career development experience and have it be something that was meaningful. So these are outlined in more detail in the toolkit, which I'll get to in a little bit, but I wanted to put these out here, right? So if I'm an individual and I'm going into an internship type experience, right, I should really be provided some opportunities to reflect. Also, if I'm the employer, I should be provided some opportunities to reflect, right? Sometimes we just keep going through the motions, and so often I would ask students, what have you learned from this experience so far? And they're like, I don't really know. So how are we building in these intentional moments for an individual to think about what have they learned, but also how have they learned it? I think one of the most beneficial things is not so much to compliment someone on a good job done, but to say like, wow, like you're doing a really great job. Like, what did you do to get to this point? Like, how did you get to this point of doing a great job, right? Or if you're struggling, like, what have you tried so far? And let's think about some other ways to attack this problem, right? So having those opportunities to reflect, even though I know we probably don't do it for our own selves as much as we should, is a really valuable component of these CDEs. There also really should be support from an industry expert. So again, individuals should not be going into this experience just expecting to kind of show up, do some kind of like administrative remedial tasks, right? Punch the clock and leave for the day. There really should be someone who is not just a supervisor, right? So yes, in a sense, that industry expert, that employee of the employer, right? They are a supervisor where they're giving tasks to that intern, that individual, let's say, but they're also really working one-on-one to provide feedback and to coach individuals through tasks. So as an individual is being presented with a new task, they're supplying some sort of like scaffolding or assistance or suggestions or coaching, right, to continue to get them through new tasks. And as they're becoming comfortable with tasks, they're challenging them to even take on more, right? A big piece that I want to say here is a lot of times when an individual goes into an internship type experience, they're typically assigned to one employee at the host site. And then sometimes they might start to work with other departments or other people within that host site, that employer. And something I really want to push here is really thinking about how does that employee who is the supervisor, the main or the initial supervisor for that individual, that intern, how are they communicating and talking with their team, and then communicating any projects that their team has back to that intern, and really creating just that understanding of how projects should be explained to the intern or how an intern should be brought in to that project, and not just like sending the intern off to a team. And then now, that intern, that individual is getting frustrated. They have some anxiety. The team at the employer is kind of getting frustrated, right? But to make sure that there's kind of that handoff, that conversation between if an individual is going to go work with someone other than their main supervisor at the employer. There also should be tasks that reinforce competency. So I'm going to, if you're not familiar, I'm going to get to those screenshots here in a moment. But again, really thinking about, we hear constantly from individuals, organizations, schools, employers, that it really is those essential employability skills that are so meaningful and so impactful, and really the true, what's the word I want to use here? Like the true indicator of whether someone is going to be successful in this type of experience. Do they have the ability to work on a team? Are they reliable? Can they practice time management? How do they communicate, right? So however, a host site for a CDE, that employer, that organization could really get a individual engaged in those is really helpful, right? Because those are transferable regardless of where that individual ends up working or whatever industry or whatever education path or training path they might take. Those will always stay with them. As we all know, like the best way that you learn those essential skills is on the job, like getting in the work and having to work with others really helps you develop those skills and practice and reflect and engage in those. But also, individuals should be engaging in technical competencies. If they are on a pathway to pursue a career in the health sciences, it's really important that they engage in tasks that they would be doing in that field. I always think back to my own college experience. I went to Purdue University. I majored in biology. I thought I was going to save the whales and be a marine biologist. And then I did an internship during college at the Shedd Aquarium and realized that I just really don't like touching fish. And I don't really want to do the research part. I don't really want to, I realized I was much more of a social creature than I thought I was, beyond just working with animals who would never talk back to me. But of course I would have conversations with them. So I wish I would have done something like that earlier, but still that experience really told me I'm engaging hands-on and technical skills related to marine biology, and I am not having a good time. And I just don't feel like this is something where I could really commit my whole self to for the rest of my career. So that was it's always a good experience too, if someone realizes that as they're engaging in this, if they don't like it, that's also a win. Another piece is that there should be some sort of participant and host support. And so I'm going to flag here, throughout the toolkit, you're going to see the word participant and host. Again, the toolkit was written to be universal. So whether you're a school, an organization, a training program, an employer, whoever might be looking at this toolkit, to just use those really broad terms. So a participant would be your student or your intern, whoever the individual is that's going to engage in this experience. And then the host is the site of where that CDE, where that experience is happening. But in that, so there should be some sort of participant and host support. As the managing organization, so whether it's a school, a training program, a community-based organization, right, a workforce provider, you all would be then the managing organization who is coordinating and setting this up. You're getting the partnership with the employer, you're recruiting the participants, right? And it should be really clear to both hosts and participants who then at that managing organization or a group of who, right, who they should be reaching out to if there's any needs, and also to have conversations with them, again, talking back to that reflection point about receiving and providing any feedback, right? Again, you are, as a managing organization, you are serving both the participants and the hosts. And it's really vital that you have that availability to do so as much as possible, understanding that, of course, bandwidth and time we need way more of it than we ever have. There also should be a thought to having an assets and needs-based approach. So, so often I feel like I would have some of the students that I work with go into their internships, and some of the employers were wonderful, right? Of course. And some of them were oh, well, my student's not going to know how to do this. They're not going to know how to do this. And actually, they are really great sources of talent. Again, they've had some sort of work-based learning experience before this. They've engaged in some really targeted experiences and potentially coursework and training and curriculum, right? So think of them as resources of talent, right? I think one of the most valuable things, I have a high school intern right now here with our team at Ed Systems, and I'm her main point of contact. And one of the best things that she always brings to the work is kind of questioning why we do things the way that we do. We get so set in our ways, and this is the way we do things. And bringing in a student or a participant like that to really kind of ask those questions and find potentially even more efficient or strategic ways to do things is really valuable. But also thinking in that needs-based sense. So if you're about to place a participant at a host, who is that host? So, maybe the host is in their industry, and that's the industry the participant wants to go in. But what is that support going to look like from the host? Is it a really hands-on partner, or do they expect the student to work more independently, right? It's one thing to want to be able to put someone into an industry that's relevant to their pathway, but it also needs to be thoughtful as much as possible. And this goes back into getting as much information as possible from that host. How are they really going to support this participant, right? Some participants can be totally fine working independently. Other participants need a bit more coaching, right? And so again, how do you kind of prepare the host for that, but also not make it sound like their participant is incapable of performing the task, right? It's a tricky balance there based on different partnerships that you have. The last thing here, again, is this experience relevant and rewarding? So is it applicable to the pathway, to the industry area that they're interested in? Are they being recognized for it, right? Again, that credit or compensation, or both, right? An individual can definitely get both credit and compensation for participating in a CDE. I guess I'll pause there for a moment if there's any questions.
No questions at this time.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Scott. So as I've been referring to, these are the essential employability competencies. Again, this is linked at the end of this presentation. It's also available on pwr.org to see the state adopted top 10 cross-sector essential employability competency statements. So again, to that point I made earlier about engaging in competencies that are transferable, these would be your go-tos right here. And again, these are the things that most industry partners, employers, schools, organizations are all saying that are the most valuable things to develop, because these will set you up for success regardless of how your career pathway might shift. As we all know, it isn't quite the case anymore. I think about my dad, who's in heating and plumbing. He has been doing that since he was 19. He's going to be at 63, right? And he's going to retire there. You know, I mean, that's just what he did for, oh my gosh, how many years is that? 44 years? A lot of years. But so often, like even myself, you know, I'm in my early 30s and I've already done maybe 3 or 4 shifts, right? So it's definitely more of a changing environment where folks are rotating in and out of jobs, depending whether it's a personal decision or whether it was decision by their employer, right? And so developing these top 10, these essential employability competency statements are so valuable and so meaningful for an individual to take with them and continue as they run into new challenges and new jobs. They can always utilize these skills to set them up to be successful. There's also been added in here some entrepreneurial competencies. So again, going back to that changing workforce, we have a lot of folks who are, you know, self-employed or running their own businesses, or they have, I know folks like to say they have like a side hustle, right? There's a lot of people being freelance in this space now. And so also trying to engage then students thinking about what does that mean? So there are, you know, if any of you all are freelance or know folks who are, my husband he's a freelance photographer, and there are definitely pros and cons to that, right? And so thinking through that, if a student wants to be an entrepreneur, what is that going to look like for them, and what kind of skills are going to be most valuable to them as they pursue that path as an entrepreneur? And then here is just an example of some technical competencies. So these are the ones that have been defined for the finance and business services pathway. So individuals who are interested and on this pathway, again, all these competencies were developed by a diverse stakeholder group. So that involves educators, employers, community-based organizations. They were all looking at these and thinking about all the different types of technical skills that are out there and saying, what does an individual really need to do before they might be trying to actually like get a job or pursue a permanent position with a company. And so for finance and business services, this is where they've landed, but they also have them for manufacturing, health sciences. They have them for an education pathway. They also have them for a creative pathway as well. So kind of thinking back to some of those entrepreneurs, I think about the creative pathway a lot. And so some different technical skills that would be used there. So please definitely take a look at this document. And so I'm flipping back just for a second, but these essential skills and these technical skills, right, they shouldn't be anything totally shocking. They're just here, they're outlined. They have been seen from folks all throughout the state of Illinois. We had some national partners as well who were helping as we developed these to give us information from what's happening more broadly in the field. So these are very much adopted and statements that are committed to by a diverse group of stakeholders. So I want to spend some time now talking about what this actually looks like. And so I have a few community examples, and then I'll get into the actual toolkit resource to talk you all through what that looks like. So the first one that I want to talk about here is in Peoria. So Peoria is doing a ton of work to really regionally align what's happening. And so they're using CDEs to really scale and align their work-based learning in the region. So they have been very heavily focused on the College and Career Pathway Endorsement Framework. And they've also been really focused on using those essential and technical skills that I just referred to. So they work closely, so the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council and different schools in the area work really closely with CAT to offer this Essentials for Life program. And so CAT now offers paid work experience in welding, assembling, painting, engineering, and quality at Caterpillar. Peoria, the different schools that they're working with are in a competency-based education pilot. So they align their competencies that are happening in the class with the post-secondary apprenticeship competency. So students are very much engaging already in what is needed for an apprenticeship to pursue then that with CAT while they're still in school and participating in this CDE at CAT. So they're at 6 different unique manufacturing companies and 7 different CAT business units. And they do, so again, talking back to those essential skills, something that I think is so valuable here is that twice a month on Fridays, all the different interns at CAT, they come together and they do some essential skills coursework with CAT employees. So again, CAT employees are talking directly to them about why these essential skills are important and how they can engage and practice with them in the workplace. And so I included here a few photos. Again, a lot of the questions I get is that, so these are youth. These are actually high school youth. Some of them have now been hired on and are continuing to work. But I get a lot of questions and pushback sometimes about liability of having students who are 16, who are 18 on the plant floors and doing welding and things like that. What I would say is that there's no law prohibiting students from doing that. It becomes more a need for a conversation with that manufacturing employer, that partner, to get them to a point to be able with comfortable allowing students to do that. If employers are not allowing it, for the most part, it's because of their own personal practices and feelings about it. There is no state, federal law prohibiting any of that. There is, you can't be over 18 to work certain equipment, but there's no reason that someone under 18 cannot be on the plant floor engaging directly in these technical skills. The other example I want to talk about is health sciences. Again, this is one that I get a lot of questions about. I know folks get a lot of questions about is if you have someone with HIPAA and FERPA and all those things, right? So what I would say about how to get around HIPAA is that you just do HIPAA. So you just have whoever the individuals, the participants are, the youth who might be participating in this, they just need to complete HIPAA. So here in Chicago, Westside United is a collection of different hospitals in the area. And so they've worked closely with all their different partners to support 16 and plus year olds to participate in their internship program. So all of these participants really go through a full HIPAA training. They have an orientation. They sign off on confidentiality agreements, again, knowing that they might potentially see a patient's records, right? And then they do a lot of education around with hospital staff to think about how to incorporate participants into their daily tasks. So one example I saw that I thought was really just a really smart idea and really great for the participant is, a participant couldn't do direct patient care, right? They have to be some sort of registered CNA or nurse before they could ever actually do patient care. But an intern who was on one of the floors and working closely with the nurses on that floor, whenever a patient would press their call button, the intern would actually go to the room, address the patient and see what it is that they needed. And then they would bring that back to the nurses to communicate that need. And what I thought was just so valuable there is that the patient feels like they're being seen faster. If any of you all have been in a hospital for any reason, right, sometimes it takes a bit for a nurse to come over there. They're incredibly busy people, right? But you have that intern going over there. They hear you, they see you, you can tell them what you need, and they get practice having that dialogue with a patient, right? That customer service piece can be, it's an essential skill, right? Like how do you communicate and work with others? And some patients, I'm sure, are super friendly. Other patients, not so much. Other patients sometimes may have struggle explaining what they need, right? And so that intern can really start to grapple with that. And for the nurses, it helps them make their patients feel more seen and heard more quickly. But then the nurses would be the ones who would perform any sort of care or procedure that might be needed. So those are my two kind of examples of CDEs. I also wanted to talk about in the Sauk Valley area, this really cool initiative that they've started. And this just kind of gets to, as you're thinking about like how to bring employers and educators or training providers together, right, is again, these essential skills that everybody loves and wants folks to have. The Sauk Valley Area Chamber of Commerce, the members of that commerce, the different employers, they are engaging and they're going into different spaces, whether at organizations or through the schools, to really talk about and introduce these essential employability competencies. And they're engaging students hands-on in activities. They're talking through how these different competencies play out in their own company, at that employer, right? And then students receive a certificate at the end of employability that is recognized by local employers, or at least that's definitely something they're building to. And something I thought was really powerful about that, and this is a newer initiative in the Sauk Valley area, but what they've been thinking about is socializing this certificate, right? So the executive director, Chris Noble there of Sauk Valley Chamber of Commerce, has been going out to different spaces that tend to be, first-time jobs or entry-level jobs and saying, okay, if I have an individual who comes to you with a certificate of employability and they explain the program and everything like that, could you at least guarantee them an interview, right? So that individual might show up to the job and still, not do well at that interview, but they've gotten that step up by completing these different sessions with both employers and educators and folks from the chamber. They've engaged in those essential employability competencies and should be more prepared to perform better on the interview, but they're being guaranteed that interview, not necessarily the job, but the interview. And so, again, I think one of the best things about just work-based learning, and especially CDEs where individuals are participating for longer periods of time, is that socialization, that regional alignment, and just really talking about these things in an intentional way. Before I get into the toolkit, was just going to pause again to see if there's questions about any of those examples or anything that I've talked about so far.
I don't have any questions at this time, but if there are questions, please feel free to place your questions into the question box so that I can share them with our presenter.
Wonderful, thanks, Scott. So now I'm going to spend the rest of the time here really just talking about the toolkit. So again, this was created in collaboration with both the Illinois State Board of Education and the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. So again, the thought behind this toolkit was that it would be a universal resource for anyone throughout the state who is engaging in this type of experience and offering these experiences to participants. I think there might be a thought about it that it has a youth focus, but I also think anything that's targeted to help youth perform better in work-based learning could also be adapted and put towards adults and work-based learning as well. I mean, maybe there's different developmental stages, right, that are happening, but really these are common themes that are always there as you're preparing any individual to engage in work-based learning, especially an intensive one such as the career development experience. So the purposes of the toolkit, those have probably become a bit clear here, right? But it really is meant to establish expectations for implementing high-quality, rigorous work-based learning experiences that prepare young people to be college and career ready through the development of essential entrepreneurial and technical employability competencies. It also provides guidance, tools, and frameworks to offer a career development experience which adhere to the framework of the Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act for the College and Career Pathway Endorsement Framework. And so that's where I had mentioned earlier in the definition that there's this 60-hour requirement. I would say that 60-hour requirement is really applicable when you're thinking about this college and career pathway endorsement framework. I would say it's a bit more flexible if this career development experience isn't applying to this endorsement framework, but also, 60 hours was a number agreed upon by employers, educators, and community organizations as really what's needed for someone to spend enough time in that industry at that employer to really have dove heads on into these essential and technical skills. And then what I feel is the most valuable part of this toolkit is that it highlights best practice examples of how organizations are accomplishing this on the ground and spark thinking for other communities on how these examples might be modified to fit into their own unique context. So again, this toolkit aligns to a lot of the different stake frameworks and initiatives, but it's also looking at how is this actually happening? And so different communities have been very willing to share their different resources and templates and different case studies for what it is that they're doing to accomplish a CDE in their area. So there's three kind of main resources or buckets of resources here. So there's a full toolkit document. So if you want to get the whole PDF document, that's available for download, and it guides readers through each stage of implementation with links to the related resources and materials. What I would caution here, it's a big document. I know some folks like to print things, but it's about 103 pages. On the website I'm going to show you, you could actually download the PDF by section. So I'll explain that in a second. So you don't necessarily need to download the full thing if you like stuff in print, unless you want to read every single piece of it. If you want to target certain sections, those would be a little bit more digestible, about 20 pages or so. The Toolkit website, which is what I'll walk through here in a moment, this has the links to all the different resources and materials that are referenced in the document. And this is also updated monthly with different resources and best practices. So what I would say here is, the Toolkit document was printed back in late October, early November 2019. The website was released around the same time, but the Toolkit document, those links and those resources called out are probably going to live in there until a new version would be distributed next fall. Whereas the website is going to be the one that's most up to date with different resources, as communities share things, definitely uploading those on there. And if you follow us on Twitter, I'll make a little shout out when those are happening. So also there's customizable templates. So thinking about, looking at the different ways communities are doing some of these things, referring back to my own experience in this area. There are templates created that are in Microsoft Word format that can be downloaded and customized to then reflect the unique needs and unique context and needs of each community and organization. So those documents are ready and editable. That was a big focus there, that they wouldn't be uploaded as PDFs. They would have to be recreated. The creation of a document itself can take hours, and so definitely wanted to take that lift off of communities. So here's a snapshot of kind of what the toolkit looks like. Although actually, I guess I could just take you all to the toolkit through here. I'll do that in a second, but I'll kind of talk through the different areas here. So you can see on the top here where it says download the full CDE toolkit. So that is present no matter what. So you can always download the full thing. But if there's the second kind of longer rectangular red bar here where you can go towards each section of the toolkit. And so if I'm at getting started, for example, those essential components should look familiar. You can download then in that red box below, you could just download that section. So if that was the section you really wanted to focus on, you could just do that. At the bottom of each page, within each section are these online toolkit resources. So, you see this orange bar that goes across here and then two gray bars there. So host engagement, forming host partnerships, and host information and assessment. So as you click on those, they would drop down to all the different links that are included within that section. There's also a piece at the bottom here, and would love for you all to submit anything that you think would be a valuable resource for this toolkit and for other communities to see. Is that it's very open. Again, this should be an evolving space that's constantly updated as resources are made available. So any resources that you may have, you could submit those through there, or I'll have my contact information at the end as well if you wanted to share those with me. So just wanted to take you through here some of the different resource examples. So there's a whole list of suggested tasks that are organized by those different pathway areas. So this is a full document, but I just kind of took a screenshot here for manufacturing, engineering, technology, and trades. These are all the different things that I know have been done, that I've seen some of my own students do, but also that I've heard from other areas what's happening, and then also for finance and business services. So this is a really valuable resource as you're thinking about, engaging with different partners and thinking about what a CDE could actually look like with that partner, is starting to spark some thoughts for them about what types of tasks an individual could be involved in, rather than having them to come up with it from thin air, right? Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming and confusing for a partner, but this can really set it into some different, some of these are a bit more like very entry level, some of them are a bit more advanced, right? And very much depending on the participant that would be engaging in the CDE, they could take a look through these different tasks and think about which ones would be most applicable and useful for their time. Some other resources that are on there, again, thinking about the length it takes to create these documents. On the left is just a screenshot of the first page. So I believe this one is about 4 pages long. And again, you can delete, add to, whatever, it's very customizable, is a host profile. So talking back again, like what's the different information you want to capture from a host? Also, if you want to make these forms electronic, right, this would just give you a really good kind of launch point to think about the different items that should be included in that profile. And there is a question in here about what type of supervision would the participant receive. So is it, hands-on? Is it like semi-hands-on? Is it fully independent? Right. So there is a question there as well for hosts to complete. On the right as well is a template for a participant to complete an orientation at the host site. This is something I strongly encourage. You can prep a participant as much as possible before they start their CDE, but it's super helpful and super useful if when that participant actually gets to their host site, that the host performs some sort of orientation, whether it's formal or informal, right? But that they take them through different moments so that they can see that happening while they're in that space. I think sometimes, it's hard to fully understand what's going to happen until you're actually in that space. So those are just some examples there of what's included within the Toolkit website and within that PDF. I'm going to do something here, and Scott, let me know if you can't see it for some reason. But I'm going to go to actually the site. And this is linked at the end of the presentation. But so here's our education system site. And if you go to resources, and then it's the first one up here on the top left, Career Development Experience Toolkit, View Now. This is, again, I took screenshots of this to walk you through, but each section kind of is a quick blip into what's written within that section that you can scroll down and look at. But then at the top here, you can click within each section. So getting started, again, you could download just that section here, or at any time if you really want to download the full toolkit, that's up here as well. And again, goes through just some different highlights that are within the PDF. And then here, if you have an example of a model, but also here the different toolkit resources, so you can submit or look at what resources are included underneath there. And let's see, I'm going to go to like the host outreach. So this is where that profile came from. So again, kind of going down here and looking at the different resources for host information and assessment. This is where you would find that host profile template. It pops up as a Word document that you can download and edit. So again, yeah, this one is about 4 pages long. So calls out all those different things that you might be wanting to ask a host. Here's that piece where I told you about the levels of supervision. This is a really, really valuable question so that you can support the needs of both the partner and the participant as well. So just wanted to kind of walk you through that since I have the ability to share the full screen here with you. And I'll pause again. Scott, are there any questions about the toolkits or anything?
Well, we did have a couple of questions about access to the toolkit and access to the NIU website, EdSystems website. I've placed those answers and those links in the question or answer box and sent them out to
Great.
all of the participants. But as you noted, it'll be on the presentation as well.
Yep, absolutely. Great. So again, here's kind of my piece where, it's definitely hearing, and I think Scott has a poll here for you all. I would love to connect if you're interested in utilizing these resources. The hope is that they are very self-explanatory and that you could use them independently, but I really this work is incredibly exciting for me, and the impact that it has on participants who complete it is just so powerful and so wonderful, and even the impact that you see on those different employer partners. And so I would love to be a resource, can provide any sort of technical assistance if you want to learn more about the toolkit, if you would like me to even present to other colleagues about the toolkit who might be interested in this. I can definitely do that. I can do a similar presentation to this. I can do a Zoom call to kind of walk them through it, whatever you need. And then I really would love to just be a thought partner and provide that technical assistance, that direct support to help you adapt and implement those different toolkit components and resources. And would love to see what you all are up to as you think about utilizing any of these, and even just feedback on how they're working or not working, and where some shifts may need to happen within the toolkit to address your needs, and where you'd like to find out more as well. Right? I hope that the toolkit captures a lot for you all as you're working through this, but with anything, everything is unfinished, right? I don't think we will ever quite reach perfection with anything, right? But we can always continue to strive towards it and make things better and better to best serve community. So please complete the poll if you're interested, or my contact information is up here. I know Scott put in some different links, but would love to connect with you all to talk about using this toolkit and continuing to have it used. It's one of my favorite things when I get emails from folks and they're like, I just use your guidebook template and here's how I used it to implement in my own space, and seeing what they've come up with and how now their logo is on it and their particular parameters are on it. And it's a really wonderful thing. There were a lot of folks who spent a lot of time on this toolkit, and I really love to see it being used, right? And being something to support communities to enhance or, supplement or think differently about their own offerings for CDEs. So again, thank you all. I know Scott has linked some of those items in here. Also here at the end of the presentation are different resources for you to link directly to the toolkit website, to link directly to those technical and essential employability competencies document I talked about. That will provide some background, more detailed background for you as well if you're interested in how those were developed. The State of Illinois Career Pathways Dictionary is linked here, where these terms come from. And also I just linked the post-secondary and workforce readiness site. There's a lot of great resources on here as well, beyond the items that I've already mentioned. So I have the time now, however many questions there are, and just thank you all again for listening and for being a part of this and being engaged in providing work-based learning experiences in your community.
Thank you, Heather. And I would remind everyone that the handout or a PDF presentation of today's presentation is available on this GoToMeeting website as a handout in the materials. Thank you for attending today's webinar. As stated earlier, you will receive a survey asking you about today's webinar. Please share with us your experience and any suggestions you might have to help us improve these webinars. With that, have a great day.
Thank you all.